It was the first cold morning after the funeral. The family car drove off and left a quiet house that smelled like flowers and old wood. They said, "We will handle things," and I believed them. Later that day, I learned my parents had given my brother a $950,000 home, a bright new house with a lawn and new locks. Then they came to my door and said they wanted my small house too. I stood very still. I thought of my life in this home, the years of work and repairs. If you're watching, like the video and tell me from where are you watching. I still remember standing in my own doorway that morning, holding a cup of warm coffee, thinking it would be a normal day. My parents had called earlier saying they wanted to stop by. I didn't think anything of it. They never visited often, but when they did, it usually meant some family announcement or something about my brother. I had learned long ago not to expect anything good from these sudden visits. But still, I opened the door with a calm smile, prepared to offer them tea and a place to sit. Instead, what I saw wiped every thought out of my mind. They were standing there stiff, serious, not giving me even a small smile. My mother held a folder, my father kept a hand behind his back, and neither stepped forward until I moved out of the way. My heart tightened because I knew that kind of posture meant something heavy, something planned. I stepped aside quietly and watched them walk into my living room as if it already belonged to them. I sat across from them and noticed how their eyes scanned the house like they were checking furniture, walls, and floors, not like parents admiring their child's home, but like buyers examining property. My stomach dropped when my mother placed the folder in front of her and opened it without a word. She slipped out a stack of papers and pushed them toward me. I felt a wave of confusion wash over me. The papers looked official: contracts, deeds, financial documents, things I had never seen them bring into my home before. When I looked up, expecting an explanation, their faces stayed cold. They finally told me why they had come. They wanted my house, not to borrow, not to help manage. They wanted me to sign it over like it was nothing. They said my brother needed more space, that he and his family required a bigger place. And since they had given him the $950,000 home last year, they now expected me to contribute the same way. The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I couldn't speak for a long moment. I just stared at them as the truth sank deeper. They weren't here to visit. They weren't here out of love. They had come to take what was mine. A house I worked for, paid for, protected, and held together through years of sacrifice. They said it so casually, as if they were asking for a cup of sugar. But the way they sat there so confident, so sure I would agree, stabbed my heart. It felt like my whole childhood condensed into that moment. Every time my needs were pushed aside for my brother. Every time they said he deserved more. Every time they reminded me to be the independent one. And now, the independence they once admired was being used as a weapon against me. I listened as they explained their plan, their voices calm and rehearsed. They said I didn't need such a big house at my age. They said it was only fair because he was the future of the family. They said I should be grateful to be able to help. My hands trembled in my lap because the betrayal was so sharp I could barely breathe. I expected favoritism. My whole life was shaped by it, but I never imagined they would walk into my home and try to take it from me like I was nothing. They started pointing to the papers, showing me where to sign, telling me their lawyer was already prepared to transfer ownership. That was the moment my shock grew into something deeper, something colder. Something that settled quietly into my chest. My parents had already decided the outcome before even speaking to me. They had already told my brother the house would be his. They had already made arrangements. My mother kept talking about how smooth the process would be. My father mentioned how they didn't want arguments, as if my voice didn't matter. It wasn't a request, it was an expectation. And the worst part was the confidence in their faces. As if they thought I would simply hand everything over because I had done it my entire life. They didn't see me as their daughter in that moment. They saw me as an obstacle in the way of my brother's comfort. I sat there listening to words that no daughter should hear. I heard the message beneath their reasoning. I didn't matter. My hard work didn't matter. My stability didn't matter. Only my brother's comfort mattered. And all I could think was that they truly believed I was weak enough to obey without question. They believed I would fold the way I always had. But something broke inside me that morning. Something silent but powerful. The shock had stripped me of any remaining illusions I had about them. I realized that if I didn't act now, I would lose everything. And worse, they would think they had the right to take even more. The shock didn't freeze me. It awakened me. Growing up, I learned early that my parents had a soft spot reserved only for my brother. It wasn't hidden and it wasn't subtle. It was the kind of favoritism you could see even as a child, the kind that shapes the way you understand love, fairness, and your own worth. My brother always received the bigger slice of cake, the better gifts, the easier path. I worked hard for everything, while he simply asked and received. I thought that was just the way families were. Some children were simply loved louder. As I became older, I convinced myself it didn't matter. I built my own life, my own home, my own savings. But the truth is, the past never really disappears. It waits, and it always returns when you least expect it. When my parents gave him the $950,000 home, I wasn't shocked. Everyone around me said I should be angry or hurt, but I only felt tired. It was just another example in a long list of moments where he was lifted up while I was told to be happy for him. I remembered every holiday where he was praised while I did the work. I remembered every birthday where he received something expensive and I received something practical. I remembered every time my mother said, "He needs more than you," as if my needs were smaller, as if my life required less care, less attention, less value. For most of my adult life, I believed that if I worked harder, maybe I could earn their fairness. I believed love was something you proved, not something you simply received. I put my head down, paid my bills, saved my money, and built my little house with sweat and discipline. I didn't ask anyone for anything. I paid every mortgage payment. I fixed every broken window. I cut every blade of grass myself. And even though I was proud, a small part of me still hoped my parents would one day see the difference between him and me, not to shame him, but to simply acknowledge that I existed, that I had worth outside of being their responsible child. But they never changed. When my brother messed up, they bailed him out. When he failed, they covered for him. When he wasted money, they gave him more, and each time, they expected me to smile and support their decision. I always did. I thought keeping the peace was the right thing. I thought family unity mattered more than my own feelings. But inside, resentment slowly grew. I pushed it down for decades because good daughters don't complain, they endure. The biggest injustice came years before this house argument. My parents asked me to help them financially during a difficult time. I gave them money I didn't really have, trusting they would pay me back. They never did. In fact, they later gifted my brother a huge check during Christmas, the same amount I had loaned them. They didn't even mention repayment. They never acknowledged it. They acted like it never happened. I told myself it was fine, but that memory stayed buried deep, like a wound that never quite healed. Over time, the pattern became so predictable that I could almost guess their next move. When my brother got married, they gave him another large sum of money for a fresh start. When I got married, they gave me a blender. When he lost his job, they blamed the company. When I lost mine, they said I should have planned better. When he struggled, they prayed for him. When I struggled, they lectured me. It was as if my entire existence was measured in utility, what I could fix, what I could provide, what I could take on without complaining. That history shaped the moment they stood at my door, demanding my house. It wasn't sudden. It was the final step in a long climb of entitlement. They believed my home was theirs to claim because they never saw my independence as strength. They saw it as something they could take advantage of. They thought I would give in because I always had before. They thought guilt would break me. They thought duty would push me aside. They thought I would hand over the roof I built because that was the role I had played my whole life, the responsible one, the giving one, the one who had to sacrifice so their golden child never had to. But they didn't realize something important. Years of being overlooked doesn't break a person, it prepares them. After so long being treated like I didn't matter, I finally learned that standing up for myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. And when they came for my house, they awoke a strength I didn't know I still had. For years, the signs had been there, but they were so small and so quietly placed that I kept brushing them aside, telling myself that I was being sensitive or imagining things. It began with tiny comments my parents made at family gatherings, remarks that sounded casual but carried a weight I didn't understand then. They would say things like how fortunate my brother was, how responsible he seemed, how he deserved the best because he was carrying the family name. At the time, I simply nodded and pushed the thoughts away, believing it was just their way of complimenting him. But now, as I look back, I understand that these were the first steps in something bigger, something meant to shape the future they wanted, not the one I had built for myself. Little by little, their tone shifted. They started mentioning how I should help more, how I should consider sharing what I had, how families worked best when everyone gave a little. Those small hints were painted as kindness, as advice, but beneath the softness, there was pressure. It became clearer later that those comments were seeds, planted quietly so they could grow into expectations. They were signaling what they planned long before I understood their intentions. Even in casual conversations, I noticed how decisions always revolved around my brother. Where family money went, who received support, who was praised. When he bought a new car with their help, they expected me to be happy for him. When he lost his job, they insisted I pay for his groceries, just for a little while. And when he received the $950,000 house, they described it as a family investment, not a gift. They told me it was for all of us, but the deed had only his name on it. I remember standing in that living room as they toured the house proudly, pretending it was a shared dream when every piece of paper said otherwise. Slowly, I felt the shift around me. The family dynamic wasn't about fairness, it was about control. They acted as if my success was something that belonged to them. Whenever I bought something for my own home, they commented that I should have saved more. Whenever I repainted a wall or fixed something, they said it would have looked better in my brother's house. Each comment chipped at me in ways I didn't fully notice at the time. What once felt like simple family advice turned into a pattern of undervaluing me and elevating my brother. It wasn't jealousy, it was a sense of imbalance. I had worked all my life, paid every bill myself, built every corner of my home with effort, sacrifice, and stubborn determination. Meanwhile, they made sure he never had to worry about a thing. As months passed, I started noticing how they reacted whenever I mentioned boundaries. If I said no to helping financially, their faces tightened. If I set limits, silence filled the air, thick and uncomfortable. They didn't outright argue, but the pressure was there, heavy, persistent, and unspoken. Then came the more obvious hints. They began suggesting that my house had too much space for one person and how it would benefit the family if we reorganized assets. They hinted that maybe my brother could use my property for his business. Every time I refused, I saw it, the flash of disappointment, the disapproval slipping through their polite expressions. I didn't know then that these reactions were warnings, signs of an intention they hoped I wouldn't notice until it was too late. One day, I saw them whispering in my own driveway, while my brother pointed at my house, as if discussing plans for a future that didn't include me. That moment stayed with me. Something felt wrong, but again, I pushed the feeling aside because it was easier to believe they were simply confused, not preparing to take something that was mine. Even phone calls became unusual. They asked more questions about my job, my income, my savings. They wanted to know if I had updated my will, who the house was under, whether anyone else had keys. I didn't understand why they cared so much. I told myself they were just being curious, But deep down, a quiet voice whispered that something bigger was happening. The small clues built over time. Missing mail, unusual mentions of property taxes, questions about refinancing. Each detail seemed harmless alone, but together they created a picture that I refused to see. A picture of manipulation carefully planned over months, maybe years. By the time they finally stood at my doorstep demanding my home, I realized that everything I had dismissed had been guiding me toward this moment. Every comment, every hint, every small shift in their attitudes, it had all been leading here, and I had been walking into it blindly, believing that family could never turn into something threatening. But now I know better. The days after their visit felt heavy, as if every corner of my home carried the echo of their demand. I tried to continue my normal routine, but even the simple act of making morning coffee felt different. I kept thinking about the look on their faces when they stood at my door, almost as if the house was already theirs. It made my chest tighten. This home was not given to me out of charity. I had worked, saved, and sacrificed for years to buy it. I had gone without small comforts, skipped vacations, and lived carefully so that I could one day have a place that was truly mine. But my parents treated it like it was a spare object in the family, something they could collect whenever they felt like it. That thought alone made the walls around me feel both safe and threatened at the same time. Soon after, the calls began. At first, they were short and calm, asking if I had changed my mind yet. Their voices carried a tone of expectation, like they were giving me time to understand my duty. But every call left me feeling unsettled. I knew something darker was building underneath their polite words. It was in the pauses, the sighs, and the shift in their tone. It reminded me of all the years they used guilt to get what they wanted. When I was younger, I always folded under that weight. I always gave in, always stayed quiet, always tried to keep peace. But this time, the stakes were bigger. This wasn't a childhood disagreement. This was my home, my stability, my future. By the third day, the tone changed completely. The politeness disappeared. They no longer asked, they demanded. They said they deserved control because they had raised me, fed me, clothed me, and taught me everything I knew. They said that my brother needed more support, as if the house worth nearly $1 million they had already given him was not support enough. They insisted he was struggling, that he needed space, that he needed stability, and that giving them my home was the right thing to do. The more they spoke, the clearer their intentions became. This wasn't about helping him. It was about control. It was about keeping him dependent, keeping me silent, and keeping themselves centered in every decision. I listened quietly, not because I agreed, but because I wanted to understand how far they were willing to go. And slowly, I saw the full picture. They wanted to use my home as a tool to maintain their influence. They wanted to keep my brother tied to them, and they wanted to strip me of any independence I had built for myself. They wanted me to feel small again, like the quiet daughter who always followed orders. That realization made my hands shake, but it also awakened something strong inside me, something I had buried for decades. When they realized I was not giving in, their strategy shifted once again. They began using emotional manipulation, reminding me of old family moments, trying to make me feel guilty for refusing. They brought up the sacrifices they claimed to have made, as if those acts erased the years of favoritism and uneven treatment. Then came the worst part, the threats. Soft at first, then sharper. They suggested they could take legal steps. They hinted at having authority. They said they knew ways to claim what they believed belonged to the family. The way they said it made my stomach sink. It wasn't just anger, it was intention. I felt fear rise in my throat. I had never imagined my own parents would threaten to take something from me this way. My brother had not said a word through any of this, but I knew he was the reason behind it. He had always assumed everything would be handed to him. The world had always bent in his direction. And now, with my parents fueling his greed, he probably believed he could claim my home just as easily as his. That thought alone filled me with heartbreak. Not because of the house itself, but because of what it revealed about my own family. I tried to sleep at night, but every noise made me worry. Every creak in the walls made me think of possible consequences. Could they really try to take my home? Could they actually make a legal move? Could they sabotage something behind my back? My mind spiraled through every possibility, and by the fourth night, I knew I could not stay passive anymore. I had to protect myself. I had to protect the house I had built with my own hands and sacrifices. Their threats were no longer just words. They were warnings of what they were capable of doing, and I knew they were prepared to go further. But fear was not the only thing growing. Something else rose inside me: determination, a quiet, steady strength. If they wanted to escalate, then so would I. They had pushed me to a point where silence was no longer an option. I refused to be bullied. I refused to lose the only place that had ever truly belonged to me. The more they threatened, the clearer my path became. I would fight for my home. I would fight for myself. And the moment I decided that, the fear began to fade, replaced by a calm resolve I had never felt before. I remember the exact moment everything shifted. After days of feeling cornered, pushed, and treated like I was some helpless child with no rights, I finally decided to do what I should have done from the start: call my lawyer. I had been so shaken by my parents' demands and the constant pressure that I forgot one simple truth: this house was mine. I had paid every bill, every tax, every repair. I had worked years to make every wall, every room, every inch of it something I could finally call my own. Still, fear makes you forget your own strength, and for a while, they had me doubting myself. But when my lawyer picked up the phone and I explained everything, the threats, the demands, the way they tried to twist my emotions, he let out a small, calm laugh that instantly made my chest loosen. He said, "They have no claim, not one. You own this house fully. No one can touch it, and no one can force you to hand it over." I went silent for a moment. His words felt almost unreal. I had been shaking for days, scared that my own parents might find some loophole or old law to take away the only home I had ever built for myself. But hearing him say, so confidently, that I had nothing to fear, it was like someone lifted a huge weight off my shoulders. He went step by step through the records. The deed was in my name alone. There were no shared accounts, no shared loans, no documents linking them to this property in any way. I had purchased it independently, and everything, from legal fees to renovations, had been paid with my own income. Every paper proved it. As he spoke, something changed in me. The trembling in my hands stopped. The fog in my head finally cleared. I realized how much power I actually had and how much they expected me not to understand my rights. My lawyer even said he could file a protective notice on the property just to ensure no one attempted anything behind my back. He explained how common these family manipulation cases were. One child singled out, one child pressured, one child used. His voice was calm, but his tone carried a truth I needed to hear. You're not wrong. You're not imagining it. They're trying to take advantage of you, and you don't have to let them. When I hung up the phone, I sat in the middle of my living room and felt my entire body go still. It was the first peace I had felt since they stood on my doorstep demanding the keys to my home. I looked around at the furniture I bought, the carpet I installed after saving for months, the kitchen I redid after years of dreaming. Everything reminded me of sacrifice, patience, and hard work. And they wanted to take all of it without shame, without hesitation, without even a moment of guilt. But now I knew the truth. They couldn't. They had no legal path, no paperwork, no right to even make the request. All they had was manipulation. And now that I saw through it, the power they once held over me shattered. The realization didn't just free me, it lit something in me, a quiet strength, a firm line. They had pushed their luck for too many years, always putting my brother above me, always assuming I would bend, always believing I would be the one to give up. But this time, they had pushed the wrong button. This time, I had the law on my side. This time, I wouldn't step aside. I stood up, walked to my office drawer, and pulled out every document related to my house. The deed, the loan statements, the payment receipts, the insurance papers. I placed them in a neat folder. Beside it, I printed the email from my lawyer, confirming everything. Then I placed the folder on my dining table like a shield. It was more than paper. It was my proof, my protection, my freedom. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I would do the next time they tried to pressure me. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't explain. I would simply show them the truth they never expected me to carry. The legal truth they couldn't argue with. They thought they could strip me of my home, but they forgot one thing. I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't unaware. I was the rightful owner of this house. And I finally had the confidence to defend it. Tomorrow, when they came back, and I knew they would, everything would be different. When I realized my parents were not acting out of confusion or misunderstanding, but out of entitlement and greed, something inside me finally changed. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to keep the peace. I stopped trying to be the good daughter who always smiled, always agreed, always stepped back so others could step forward. Instead, I felt a sharp, quiet strength build in my chest. Not anger, not rage, but a steady resolve. I knew that if I didn't protect myself now, I would lose everything I had built, everything I had worked for, everything that was finally mine. I went to my bedroom, shut the door, and pulled out the large box where I kept every important document. Old deeds, property tax records, mortgage papers, insurance files, bank statements. I placed them all on the table and began arranging them chronologically. I wanted every detail clear. I wanted every number lined up, every signature visible, every date easy to point to. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing for war, a silent, legal, careful war that would leave no ground for manipulation. As I sorted, I remembered each sacrifice I had made through the years, saving every bit of money, patching clothes instead of buying new ones, skipping vacations, cutting budgets, working long shifts, and staying up late to fix things around the house. I had built my life brick by brick. No one had handed me a home. No one had gifted me luxury. Everything came from my effort and steady commitment. That house wasn't just a structure. It was a symbol of every hardship I overcame. And now, my own parents wanted to take it as if it were a toy they could pass around. The thought tightened my chest, but the determination only grew stronger. When the documents were arranged, I took photographs of each page. I created digital copies and saved them to a secure folder. Then, I emailed those copies to my lawyer, marking the message as urgent. I wanted everything documented, time-stamped, and protected from any sudden legal trick or fabricated claim they might attempt. My lawyer replied quickly, confirming that he had received everything. That alone eased a weight off my shoulders. Next, I created a physical binder. Every paper in clear sleeves, clearly labeled, clearly visible. If they wanted to push me, I would be ready. If they wanted to threaten me, I would have answers. If they wanted to claim rights, I would show proof. And if they wanted a fight, I would not be the one to walk away this time. As I worked, another realization settled in. This wasn't just about the house. It was about years of imbalance. Years of standing in my brother's shadow while they lifted him and ignored me. Years of being the responsible one while he was rewarded for doing nothing. Years of giving them my time, my care, my patience, while he received their pride and praise. The house was just the final straw, the last swing in a long chain of unfairness. When I finished preparing the documents, I called a close friend, someone who knew my family history and my struggles. She told me I was doing the right thing, that it was time I protected myself, that independence wasn't selfish, it was survival. Her voice steadied me, reminding me that standing up to your own family is never easy, but sometimes necessary. I went through the entire property once more, checked the locks, checked the windows, checked the security cameras. I changed passwords and updated alerts. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being safe. When people feel entitled to what is not theirs, they sometimes try things you never expect. I wasn't taking any chances. I also reviewed the property insurance, making sure everything was active and accurate. My goal was simple: protect my home in every way the law allowed. I wasn't sabotaging anyone. I wasn't retaliating with malice. I was safeguarding what was mine and ensuring that no manipulation or guilt could break that barrier again. When the binder was complete, the digital copies secure, and my legal protection locked in place, I sat down on the couch and exhaled fully for the first time that day. I felt the tension slowly leave my shoulders. I felt the fear quiet down. And in its place, a new kind of calm settled. The calm of someone who has finally decided to stop being walked over. This wasn't revenge. This was self-preservation. This was the moment I chose myself after years of choosing everyone else. And I knew, without a single doubt, that the next time my parents tried to step into my home with expectations and entitlement, they would not be facing a helpless daughter. They would be facing a woman who knew her worth and had the paperwork to defend it. When the day finally came to face them, I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that grows only after months of quiet anger and long nights thinking about every choice, every insult, every manipulation. I heard their car pull into my driveway, the same driveway I had painted, cleaned, repaired, and worked hard to keep. The tires crunched slowly on the gravel, as if they enjoyed dragging out the moment. I watched from the window while they adjusted their clothes and checked their expressions. My mother rehearsing her hurt look, my father practicing the same hardened stare he used whenever he wanted control. They walked up to the door like it already belonged to them. But this time, I didn't feel fear. I felt ready. I opened the door before they could knock. My mother stepped back, caught off guard. My father lifted his chin, trying to look dominant, but there was a small flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe even fear that their plan would fail. Years ago, that flicker would have made me shrink. Now, it only fed my strength. I stepped aside and motioned them in, not out of respect, but because I wanted them to see the table I had prepared. I had stacked every deed, every document, every legal paper neatly in a folder. My lawyer had highlighted the sections in bright yellow: ownership, rights, restrictions, protection. Their names weren't on anything, not one word, not one line. They walked into the living room and paused when they saw the folder on the coffee table. My mother's eyes narrowed. She knew instantly that this wasn't the meeting she expected. She crossed her arms, trying to regain control, and said she hoped I was finally ready to be reasonable. My father cleared his throat and launched into another long speech about family unity, equal sharing, and responsibility. All the words they always used when asking me to give up something, but never words they used with my brother. Their hypocrisy sat in the room like a foul smell. I sat down slowly and let them talk. They grew impatient when I didn't respond. Eventually, my father demanded that I hand over the keys and sign temporary transfer papers so my brother and his growing family could settle in. My mother added that I didn't need such a big place at my age and that it was time to think of the family. Every word felt like a blade. Not because it hurt, but because I finally saw what I had refused to see my entire life. They never saw me as equal, never valued my work, never cared that I built my life alone. They wanted what they always wanted: control. I took a slow breath, opened the folder, and slid the papers toward them. They glanced down, expecting signatures of surrender. Instead, they saw highlighted lines confirming my absolute ownership. My mother's face drained of color. My father leaned forward, blinking in confusion. I held their gaze and spoke as calmly as I could, each word steady, sharp, and final. I told them the truth. This house was mine. Every brick, every window, every inch of land. They had no legal claim, no right to demand anything. If they continued harassing me, I would file for protection and report their threats to the authorities. They stared at me like they had never seen me before. My father tried to raise his voice, but I didn't flinch. I told him loudly enough to cut through whatever power he thought he had. "You cannot take this house. Leave now or deal with the courts." My mother looked like she might faint or scream. I couldn't tell which, but she finally understood that their control was gone. For the first time in my life, they saw that I wasn't the obedient daughter they could bully into giving up her home, her money, her peace, or her future. I had spent decades bending under their rules, their favoritism, their cruelty disguised as guidance. But this moment was different. I wasn't asking for fairness anymore. I was demanding respect. My father stuttered out a warning, some empty threat about lawyers, but even he knew the fight was over. Everything they had hoped to take from me was legally protected. Everything they had assumed would be easy was impossible. I had turned the tables, and they had nothing left but shock. I pointed to the door and repeated my words, "Leave or face consequences." And this time, they listened. They walked out without another word, their footsteps heavy, their pride shattered. I closed the door behind them and locked it, not just to protect the house, but to protect myself from ever being treated like less again. When the moment finally came to deliver the truth, the air in my living room felt heavier than ever. My parents sat together on the couch, stiff-backed and jittery, the same posture they used when they were about to scold me as a child. But this time, the power was not in their hands. The folder of documents on my lap was thicker than any argument they could twist, thicker than guilt, thicker than the years of favoritism they had tried to disguise as family decisions. I looked at them calmly, the kind of calm that comes only when a person has nothing left to fear. My brother hovered near the window, arms folded tight, jaw clenched, waiting for what he assumed would be an easy win. I placed the deed on the table first. Their eyes widened. I placed the mortgage statements, all paid off by me alone. My mother shifted uncomfortably. My father cleared his throat, trying to recover the confidence he'd marched in with. My brother stepped closer, as if he could physically snatch away the truth, but I slid the documents out of his reach. Their expressions began to crumble the moment they realized that every signature was mine, every payment was mine, every legal right belonged solely to me. There was no family claim, no loophole, no share for my brother, no avenue left for their manipulation. I watched their arrogance drain out of them slowly, like water leaking from a cracked jar. For the first time in years, I felt taller, not in height, but in presence. I felt like someone who finally understood her worth. My mother tried to speak first, rushing through excuses about misunderstanding, about wanting to unite the family, about helping my brother get on his feet. Each sentence sounded more desperate than the last. My father kept adjusting his glasses, flipping through the pages as if sheer willpower could rewrite the ink. My brother's face, once smug, now looked bruised with embarrassment. But shame wasn't enough. They needed clarity, firm, undeniable clarity. So I spoke. I explained the legal reality. They had no rights here, no authority, no claim. This house was not theirs to take, not theirs to request, not theirs to dream about. It was mine, purchased through years of saving, scrubbing floors, skipping vacations, sacrificing hobbies, and paying bills without ever expecting anything from them. I told them calmly that I had honored myself far more than they ever had. I reminded them of the $950,000 home they gave my brother freely, proudly, without hesitation, while I had received nothing but expectations to serve, to accept, to stay quiet. The silence that followed was suffocating. My parents sat frozen, realizing their plan had collapsed. My brother's eyes narrowed, but there was nothing he could do except absorb the blow of truth. I pushed the folder toward them gently, as if handing over their own defeat. I told them plainly that if they continued to pressure me, harass me, or attempt to interfere with my property in any way, I would pursue legal action immediately. Not a threat, a promise. I wasn't raising my voice, Calm is more powerful than anger, and that calm scared them more than shouting ever could. My father looked away first, a small, reluctant sign of surrender. My mother followed, her shoulders sagging. My brother tried to muster one last attempt at control, muttering something about family unity, but I held up a hand and stopped him. Unity only exists when respect exists, and they had shown me none. They stood slowly, gathering their coats without a word, avoiding my eyes as if my confidence exposed every weakness they tried to hide. At the door, my mother turned as if she wanted to say something, an apology, a plea, or maybe another attempt to guilt me. But no words came. They left in silence, the kind of silence that happens only when a battle is lost before it even began. When the door shut behind them, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like months. I walked through my home slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the small things I had worked so hard to earn. It all looked different now, not just like a house, but like a victory, a boundary that had finally been drawn, a declaration that I was no longer the daughter they could manipulate, no longer the sister expected to sacrifice, no longer the easy target. And in that quiet moment, standing alone in my living room, I realized something powerful. Keeping my house wasn't just about brick and wood. It was about keeping myself. When the door closed behind my parents that day, the silence inside my house felt different. It wasn't empty. It wasn't heavy. It was calm. It was the first real moment of peace I had felt in years. I stood there for a long time, leaning against the wall, letting every memory settle. All the arguments, all the guilt they used against me, all the pressure to give in. It finally felt like it had somewhere to go. It was like I had opened a window and let a storm leave the room. For the first time in my life, I had protected something that was mine, and I realized that the fight wasn't only about a house, it was about respect. I walked slowly into the living room, staring at the picture frames on the shelf. Pictures of me growing up, pictures of me doing chores while my brother played, pictures of celebrations where he got the big cake and I got the leftover slice. It wasn't jealousy, it was memory. Memory of a pattern I had ignored for far too long. My parents had raised me to think that my needs came last, that my brother deserved more, that I should always adjust, always step back, always stay quiet. I used to believe that was love. Now I saw it for what it truly was, control disguised as care. I sat down at the dining table, and for the first time, I let myself feel everything fully. Anger, hurt, disappointment, but above all, strength. Yes, strength. Because standing up to your own parents, the people you were taught to obey, is not easy. Saying no to the two people who shaped your entire childhood takes a different kind of courage. A quiet courage, a lonely courage. But I had done it, and that changed something inside me forever. Later that night, I made tea and walked through every room in the house slowly. The kitchen where I cooked meals by myself. The living room where I celebrated holidays that my brother always skipped. The backyard where I planted flowers with my own hands. Every wall felt like it had a story. Every corner felt like proof of my hard work. This house wasn't bought for me. It wasn't gifted. It wasn't handed to me because I was the favorite. I had built this life brick by brick. I had earned every tile, every nail, every moment of comfort. My parents wanted my house because they assumed I would fold, just like always. They assumed guilt would control me, just like always. They assumed I would choose family peace over personal dignity, just like always. But something was different now. Maybe age changes you. Maybe betrayal sharpens your mind. Maybe enough hurt forces you to see things clearly. Whatever it was, it made me realize something simple. Family doesn't give you the right to take advantage of someone's kindness. The next morning, I woke up with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I cleaned the house slowly, with steady hands. I opened the curtains wide so the sun filled every room. I brewed fresh coffee and sat by the window, feeling proud of myself. Not proud in a loud, showy way, but in a deep, quiet way. Proud that I didn't let fear win. Proud that I didn't let guilt trap me again. proud that I finally stood up for myself. A week later, my brother texted me, not to apologize, not to check on me, but to say that our parents had explained everything and that I was selfish for not helping. I stared at the message for a full minute. Then I blocked his number. I didn't even feel anger, just clarity. I realized you cannot teach fairness to people who don't want to be fair. You cannot teach gratitude to people who only take. And you cannot save relationships that break you. I decided that day that my life would move forward without bitterness. I refused to let their greed stain my peace. I refused to let their choices define my worth. I refused to let their pressure control my future. Instead, I chose boundaries. I chose independence. I chose myself. And as time passed, I understood the real lesson. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you end up being the ones you must protect yourself from. Sometimes distance is not disrespect. It is survival. Sometimes saying no is the kindest thing you can do for your own heart. Even now, when I walk through my house, I touch the walls like they are old friends. This home is more than a building. It is a symbol, a reminder that I am not weak. I am not small. I am not someone to push aside. I am someone who finally learned to stand tall. Someone who learned to say enough. Someone who learned that peace comes from choosing yourself, even when your family wants you to choose them. In the end, I didn't just keep my house. I kept my self-respect, and that was worth more than $950,000. It was priceless.